So the second part of the video on making a Twitter bot is basically I'm going to go through the Twitter part of it. So less of the code at this point, but we have to like understand the background of where this is all coming from. And there is a module here actually. This is called TweetPy, which is a module. It's a Twitter API library. I might actually also include that. So because I've got stuff pulled up here already, I might actually do. This is how I find a lot of things, which is a pip install TweetPy, something like that. So I've done it before anyway, and you can kind of like see it here. There's videos and stuff as well that you could look at apart from this one. And here is the actual documentation. I've got it all in big fonts, but basically all that the user has to do is pip install TweetPy, which is something that we can do in our editor down or our terminal down below. So I could paste, I've got a whole bunch of stuff in there. Let me just copy that out. There should be a copy at the top of this thing actually. So I'll just see if there is a copy, otherwise I'll just copy it manually. Sometimes you've got a copy down below. There isn't, but basically it's a copy of that. There is actually a TweetPy asynchronous subpackage to be sure to install with the async extra. That's interesting because you can do asynchronous tweeting as well. There's no need for this particular project. We're just going to be tweeting once per hour, so you know it can sit there and do what it does and in the background. But basically, if I pasted that in there, it would be pip install TweetPy and to like run it. And I've already pip installed it, so and I know that it works just because I've done a test. So I've got it installed, but that's all you're typing. You'd run it, and just remember that this terminal part down below is just an integrated terminal. So you could do the same thing in the command prompt. So, and just as a reminder, I guess the command prompt is, you know, a command prompt is over here. I've got it in a slightly clever way, but in fact you could just select it, doing there. Here's a command prompt, and you know I could access Python that way, but it's much more convenient to work in the integrated terminal over here, and that's what we'll be doing. So let me just move that command prompt back. Right, so that's the actual API, not the API, that's the actual pip install for Twitter, and I guess it's going to give somewhere, although anyway, you know, I do it in this video, so that's part of it. I wonder if I hit next. Yeah, you got a getting started section, an introduction if you're new to TweetPy, and by the way, there's other modules as well that you can install aside from TweetPy. So this is one module that I know that works, and I've kind of like tested it. But basically, we have this introduction, this getting started thing over here. If you're new to TweetPy, this is the place to begin. The goal is the goal of this tutorial is to set you up and get rolling with TweetPy. We won't go into too much detail here. Just some important basics, and here's an important basic. You can kind of like copy this code out, I guess. This is the import TweetPy, which is what I've got up here, and then over on the next line or next couple of lines you've got something that does an authentication. That effectively is something that connects your computer. So if I draw it out like crudely, that's like your computer, and you know this is the Twitter servers over here. So there's some Twitter servers, and we're going to authenticate, which is effectively this here. We're going to like communicate to the Twitter server saying it's us that we want to send data in. We're going to get back some sort of authentication saying that you can do it, and then afterwards we can go and perform our tweets. So we can do lots of tweets or send messages in or get stuff back out of Twitter depending on which way we want to go. So the first step of all of that really is actually those two blue lines up here, because they are the authentication. That's what we're doing right now. So I'll get back onto the mouse, delete those. So that's the authentication, and we get back and this is how it's done. We've got get back API equals twitter.api auth. And then over here, so, and I've actually done this, I think, public tweets. So this is to get some tweets. In fact, it says it just down below. This example will download your home line, your home timeline tweets, and print each one of those of their text to the console. And actually, that's what I tested. So if I just go here, basically these were my home timeline tweets. And when I ran the code somewhere, which is, and in fact, you see the same piece of code. So I'm going to there we go. I'll put them side by side and I get the little pen out. Here we go. This is public tweets.api, public underscore tweets. I haven't even changed anything there. Equals the api.home underscore timeline. And this is one example of a use case for tweeting public tweets. We've seen a for loop. And we've seen this placeholder that goes in the for loop, and then this is and this is called the iterable. So public tweets is an iterable. It's some kind of list or dictionary or something like that. We've seen that already. It looks like it might be a list, I guess. And then, but from that anyway, it looks like it's a list. Maybe is it a list of text? But it's probably a list of tweets, and then each tweet has a component called text because it's tweet.text. So it's probably a list of tweets. So for tweeting your list of tweets, your list of public tweets, print tweet.text, which is a text of the tweet. So this all here is exactly the same, apart from my comment, as this all here. And the only bit actually to point out is these little this hash percentage is quite a nice little thing to have, because if I move everything back off of the screen so you've got a bit of room here, this percentage plus plus is actually a nice cute thing that instead of working in the Jupyter notebook, we can work in the interactive. So we can write Python code and launch it into something called the interactive terminal over here and have it running. So this pound or hash percentage sign creates a little block of code that you can run in isolation. So that's really useful. It's kind of like helpful to do that. But what I did anyway, and I can actually maybe just run some of that. I'm wondering if there's anything else for me to talk about there. But I can literally copy this out and get it working in a way. And so I do have to go to one other thing to get it working, come to think about it. So let me just delete all of that, which is, and again, this is kind of like I've put it at the top, and this was to remind me. So at the top of my code, fortunately, I did something like this, which is the actual docs. And if I click Control and hit Follow Link, what you'll see is it will launch, but it basically launches this website here. I already have it open. I'll close the unlaunched one. Here we go. We've got the launched version of it. But this is the website of how to authenticate to Twitter. So it's sort of like tells you what you've got to do, and you need to have things. It looks complicated, but it's actually very simple. Once you've done it, it's quite simple. What do we have here? You need to do something called an OAuth. I'm not like 1,000,000,000% sure what it is, but you have to authenticate into the system. And again, there's some, I guess they throw in some examples as well, but there's some, it's the same type of thing, like how you authenticate. So before I could move on to this tab here, which was, well, actually it's the same thing, because that included the authentication. But before I did that, I had to be able to authenticate one way. And what we see here is there's two versions of Twitter. Twitter version 1.1, so Twitter API version 1.1, which was the one I'd used previously. And that's probably why I called this Twitter version 2.0, because you have to authenticate in one way. And then there was a Twitter API version 2, which has an OAuth 2.0 with a bearer token. So it's a slight different way. and I'm not sure if you can use one to connect with the other, if it's forward compatible or backward compatible or that kind of stuff. So, or you know, if they work independently of each other or not. But that's one thing that I had to do as well in order to get that working, and there was examples for it. But again, so I've got the page that's up here, but if you typed into Google something like, you know, Twitter API, which I did, and you could sort of like navigate to this, so sort of like Twitter API, which I've got here already. So Twitter API, there you go. I wonder if I search for the cost of it. Most of it is free. There is paid for stuff, but what I'm doing, because it's low latency for because basically the request was only to tweet once per hour, there's no need for a paid for version of anything. So this is the Twitter API in Python over here, but actually it's the Twitter API that we're looking for, I think. So Twitter API, and here's the documentation. So again, if I plus on it, I guess, you know, you can sort of like see down here, because probably you can read the fonts, but that's the Twitter API documentation. I'm sure there's other stuff. I haven't read it because it'd been clicked on and turned purple, but I've definitely gone onto there, and that's taken us to this same page as over here, basically, like I've naved to it in some way. But there's a whole bunch of stuff getting started about the API and things that we need to do to get ourselves ready. I think I used a video too. Just be careful if you use some of the online videos, because sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. So it's a little bit difficult. But what you have here ultimately, and this is one that, here's one I made before, but this is basically what it looks like, where the user has an API key and a secret. And I'm scared to click on certain things because I don't know if, oh, well, you could reveal your API key hint over there. So, but obviously you've got to keep that. If it's, because I'm doing the online recording, you kind of like don't want to share your API key. You can regenerate it, I think, if you forget it, but it's best off writing it down somewhere straight away to sort of like remember it or have it in your system in some way, or make it part of your system variables. So you've got this API and this secret, and they seem to be the main ones. And then there's something else called a bearer token. And then actually, there's more stuff. There seems to be 5 things that's needed. So there's an API and a secret, and then there's an access token that comes with a secret. But you only seem to need 2 of them or something like that. Let me actually just pull it up in the code. So I'll move that across and get rid of this. And just go over here. I've used 4 things. So the API key, the API secret, the access token, and the access key. So, and here, that's the access token. Yes, that's the same thing twice. So, because I always have issues with this, like how do you get it working? But once you've figured out that little bit, so I've needed to use, you know, these 2 here and these 2 here, but I didn't need to use this, although I've got it. So I'm not sure what the bearer token was for necessarily, but it was necessary to get this, to get the code working. So that's kind of like a second overview. I'm not sure that there's any more to say on the Twitter API other than I did get it running. I've got an API key, a secret key, an access token, and the access key, and that was sufficient. I followed the authentication things via a copy and paste. In fact, it looks like I've used an OAuth1 user handle, and I just wonder actually if I can find it on here, possibly authentication, because there's a version 2. There's an OAuth user 1 handle. So I've taken, but actually, that's in the 2.0, so maybe it's been upgraded even in there, because I see it here, and I'm just wondering if the same thing exists here. tweepy.client, possibly not. It might be simpler in a 2.0 version, possibly. 3-legged O authentication. That might actually be where you use the bearer token for, like if you're being ultra secure. The reality is, if someone did break into this, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Although, yeah, it wouldn't do too much damage if someone did break into it. But I don't think you want to. They all look quite kind of like similar. So, but it does look like, I think I've used this OAuth 1.0, and will probably, you can then initialize the OAuth one user handler. So I've used that auth TweetPie, and it seems to work fine. So I've not migrated over. TweetPie 2, you need the bearer token. So there was a place where you needed it. Simpler bearer token under the tab. You can then simply pass the bearer token when initializing it. I've never, in any of the things that I've done, although I've always seen the bearer token, I've never had to use it. So I'm not sure what its purpose is. But if I go back to the code, I was able to copy and paste enough things in here to get the screen looking in the same way in terms of this. So basically, to get this authentication working, and there's 4 things that you need. So okay, you do the import of TweetPie at the top. Well, that's done in the code over here, and then you do this auth equals. So again, I'm literally copying and pasting in a way. So that's the TweetPie, and that got done over here. And then this is the auth TweetPie equals OF1 auth handler. So that's this piece over here. And then there's 4 components in here. You know, these are the 4 components. This one here, your API consumer key, which for me is this whole thing over here probably. And then there is the API secret key. So that's that one here. So there's 4 bits. So that's the next one down. That's a secret key. And then there is this access token. So that's me doing the access token. And each one's comma separated. Now here it's put on to a pair is put on one line, and then a pair is put on the other line. So the 2 reds and then the 2 blues. But I've put them all onto... I've put them onto 4 lines because it looks a bit nicer, and also actually, which is because of indentation in Python, you don't want to run over these sidelines over here, these 2, and I'll highlight them so like in yellow here. But these lines, well, at least this one here represents 80 characters, and according to PEP8, you don't want to go over 80 characters long. That's poor practice. You should probably consider doing other things because your code gets a little bit more complicated. Anyway, because I'm accessing my tokens from another file, and that's what this imports creds as CR is, and I'll go into that. I'm actually going to make a whole video on this. So like being able to look up other files from a previous file. So being able to like reference import effectively another module. So you can create your files somewhere, and then you can like import them. That's quite nice and handy. It's not really like the right way to do it, but it makes it very convenient. So I was able to put my secret keys, all of this stuff here, this folder here contains, so everywhere where I've used this alias CR. As you can see, this alias CR over here is kind of like it's implemented over here. So everywhere I've used that alias CR, which I've used 4 times, that's come from effectively this file, this particular file. So all of the data here, these 4 things are all coming from this file, and they're the requirements. And that's everything actually. I think this one here could actually be omitted in total when I go into actually doing the code. So I think I could cross this out. When I actually go into doing the code, I was probably testing to see if it works or something. I might actually go and delete the unnecessary. Well, actually, I know for sure I'm going to be going through my own code and deleting the unnecessary lines. The final bit here is, so I should pull this back, which is this I wonder if I can put all this in the right place. Yeah, there you go. I put it all back in the right place too. Um, this API tweets down below. API equals tweet.api auth. There we go. It's right there. So I've done all of the same pieces of the code. I've done the authentication. And actually, finally, what I do, so this is me, I'm printing api.dict just to see if it works, then print done to show myself that it's done. So I will remove this over here. I'll delete all of the lines of code, move that, move this out of the way, scroll back up to the top, and you can actually see, well, I've already run it, but I could rerun this piece of code and you'll see it run again. So I just run that piece of code and it's done this print API underscore dict, and that's just because I wanted to see something coming back, like what the hell comes back. So there's a whole dictionary of stuff that comes back, which is everything that works. But finally, because it was a whole big thing that didn't have that much use to me in terms of what was in, I just want to make sure it was done. I just do a print done just to check that it's done, and that has effectively run this little block of code, which is everything between, as I was saying before, this hash %%. So everything between there and here, basically between the next % hash, that's the next block of code. So it looks Jupyter Notebook like for the purpose of running pieces of code. But then when you want to go in production, you can actually just hit F9 to run everything and then run your whole script. So it's actually a Python script that you can break out, and these things just look like comments in the Python script because they are hashed out. They're on my dark screen, they're green because they're comment lines. So they're just comments, and Python doesn't run this. So it's only for the purpose of this interactive notebook. So this thing's really cute. It goes into the interactive notebook, and you can test little bits of code from time to time just to make sure they work without breaking everything else. So I think that's it for the kind of like setup and what Twitter looked like in the back end and this first block of code and getting it to run. I didn't create a lot of this. This came from the Twitter API. I pretty much copied the instructions of the API. I did have to go and sign up as a user in order to get the API key and the secret key. But once I'd done that, it was just a case of implementing it. I've implemented it using the, if I can just delete everything here, I implemented it using the OAuth1 user handler method. I presume you could muck around with it and get it authenticated using the other one. In fact, again, one thing that I might try, because it looks like it's already here, is I could possibly try authentication. It looks like the authentication here. I wonder if you could just authenticate with a bearer handler. That would be quite nice, because then there's only one thing to put in. Here it looks like this OAuth2 app handler, so version 2, takes in just a consumer key and a consumer secret. So, okay, that would save me 2 lines of code because I wouldn't need the access token, presumably. But it's no big deal either way because it's just 4 lines of code over here, and it's kind of like out of the way. And what I'm going to actually do is modularize this code, because what I did in previous code didn't look amazingly nice. So you'll be able to see me work through this and attempt to modularize it. What does that mean? It means put it into functions. I didn't put anything into functions. I just had it sort of like all tested and running. So I really need to put this stuff here, apart from the imports, into a function. Literally like something like def sign up like that, and be able to call this entire function. So tab. It might need to go into a class because these things do need to be stored somewhere, or they need to be global variables. I need to make them accessible outside of this method. And if I wanted to do that, I'd have to sort of like either return those values outside of the method. that's kind of like why I did not put it in a function when I was doing it initially. But that's sort of like what I would need to do. So if I do Control Z enough times, it gets rid of everything there. So back to where it was. But I'm going to pick that up in the next video. That's what I'll be doing, is kind of like getting these bits to work. So I'll put it into a method, then I'll try to run the code, then the code will fail because I didn't call it the right way. If I did want to put it into a method, I'm relatively sure that I'd probably need to, when I say method, I actually mean function. But if I did want to put it into a function, I might need to put it into a class and then the function. Remembering a function in a class is just called a method. So it would become a method of the class, basically, and then everything would be self-contained within inside the class. So I might need to do that. And I think I'll leave that here. That's enough to be said about getting the Twitter bot working, or at least started the initializations of getting it in the state that we can actually start running code and getting it working. Or at least, well, here's a second little block of code. I might just run this one too. Just here's it, only because it's tiny. That was the above one all working, and so I click on that to just stop that. I just do a control return over here just to run it. I could hit run cell, I guess. Right, I've never hit run cell before. The other really convenient thing about this is you could do control return and it runs the block of code fast, but I'll hit run cell and it does run the cell, and again it pulls me back all of the tweets from the timeline. So it in fact looks like that's my own tweet. So I recognize my own tweet in there, which is kind of like nice. Let me expand that. There we go. Date, and that's looks number of trades. Yeah, that's me. So if I pull my Twitter back on, if we look, just that's a 12743. That's actually, I've got a timestamp on there. So 15, 13, and 46 seconds. I probably have to hit a refresh, I guess, I imagine. Let me just go and go to home, click on that. Here we go, hold on. Clicked on that. I've just done a refreshed. There we go. So we can literally see that those top lines of code signed us up for Twitter, or like authenticated us. And then it only took, let me get rid of that. But it only took these 3 lines of code down here to be able to scrape my tweets or scrape at least my timeline, and one of my tweets was on my timeline, and be able to see my tweet as on the timeline. But there's a whole bunch of other tweets that made it onto the timeline that I've got not much interest in, but that was quite nice. That was a freebie to get at the end of the video. I wasn't expecting to get that. I was expecting just to get other things. So it just so happened that one of my tweets came into my own timeline somehow. So that's it. And in the next video, we'll actually go on to doing the code itself. It's going to be interesting. You'll watch me fail in real time. All of these are recorded in real time. I'm not even editing them. So if I've done a lot of ums and ahs or whatever, it's literally because I'm thinking as I'm writing the code. So you'll see the next parts in the next video.